will suffer more if I don't, and I will suffer if I do. So my impression is that you don't know. I mean, to put it rather bluntly, you don't know anything about true morality. What you are talking about is something that I can understand what you're talking about. It's just more of the same kind we have. We have fathers, we have governments, we have European community, we have also someone up there, even mightier. But I think that has nothing to do with morality, with true morality, as I have described it.
Thank you, Professor Tännsjö. Thank you. And now, Professor Craig.
Okay.
8 minutes.
All right. I don't think I'm going to need my whole 8 minutes because I don't think there's very much that needs to be said. First, does theism provide a sound foundation for morality? Professor Tännsjö admits in the last speech there could be a God, but he says, what you're talking about, I wouldn't call morality. Well, why not? Divine command morality gives you a distinction between objective good and evil, between right and wrong. It gives you moral accountability. I don't see why we should think this is not talking about morality. And when he says, well, you don't know anything about morality, this is not only insulting to me, but it's insulting to Thomas Aquinas and to a whole history of divine command moral theorists like Philip Quinn today, or Janine Marie Idziak, or others. So it's just a fact that there are lots of good divine command moral theorists today, and it's silly to say that they don't know anything about morality. If moral values are rooted in God's nature, then his nature provides the transcendent foundation which exemplifies moral virtues and constitute for us moral virtues. His commands give us a sense of obligation and duty, and he holds us morally accountable. So I think theism is clearly successful in providing an ontological foundation for morality. Now, what about atheism? Here, Dr. Tännsjö says in his last speech that atheism provides no foundation for morality, and that it's not intended to. Well, right, that's just the problem. On atheism, you've got these moral values that are just sort of floating in the air, but they don't have any foundation. It remains mysterious why things like mental states being pleasurable are good. Where do they get this strange moral property? How does it come to attach to this, the mental states of this primate species that has evolved on the planet Earth? He says, well, I can't prove my position. All right, but at least you've got to be able to defend it. You've got to give us some answer to objections to it. There are lots of philosophers today, and historically, who agree that without God, there are no objective moral values and duties. I mean, take Jean-Paul Sartre, for example. Sartre said that in the absence of God-given values, we have no choice but to just create our own values and create our own meanings, which leads immediately to subjectivism and relativism. Why is he wrong? He's an atheist. You can't just assume that these things would exist on an atheistic view, because there are plenty of atheists who disagree as well as theists. So I don't think we've seen any reason to think that these mental states contingently possessing the property of being pleasurable and would also contingently have this property being good. There needs to be some reason why we should regard them as such. And secondly, remember, I also pointed out that if you do include all pleasure in the universe, not just human pleasure, then everything is permitted, because it may maximize extraterrestrial pleasure to have virtually any action you think of take place. So it really does lead to everything being permitted if God is dead. I also argued that on atheism there are no objective moral duties. And here Dr. Tännsjö says, well, the source of obligations is what happens to other people. But I don't see where that provides a sense of duty. That's just a fact, what happens to other people. But where does the obligation come from? Where does the duty come from in the absence of a divine command? You have to have a divine law or a moral lawgiver as a source of duty, and I don't see why just the fact of consequences happening to other people provides me with any sense of moral duty or obligation. Finally, as to moral accountability, he says, well, self-sacrifice is a way of increasing the good of the world, and that's one reason you should engage in acts of self-sacrifice. But notice this doesn't answer the question of why we should adopt that moral point of view on atheism. His answer simply repeats what makes self-sacrifice good or the right thing to do on atheism. On his atheistic, hedonistic utilitarianism, self-sacrifice might increase the good of the world, and so it'd be the right thing to do. But that's not the question here in this third argument about moral accountability. It is, why should we adopt the moral point of view? Why should the atheist care that his self-sacrifice will increase the good of the rest of the world? Why should the atheist give up all the existence he ever has or ever can have or will have for the sake of someone else? Why on the atheistic view should he do that? You see, the problem is that without immortality, an ethic of compassion and self-sacrifice becomes an empty abstraction, because ultimately it makes no difference to how the universe turns out. The fate of the universe will be the same, and your fate will be the same, regardless of how you behave. And this is apt, as I say, to lead to demoralization and a deterioration of the moral life. By contrast, theism provides a strength to adopt the moral point of view in times of temptation or when it goes against self-interest. So I think, again, in conclusion, that we've seen that theism gives you a good foundation for morality. Atheism does not. If then you think that there are objective moral values and duties and accountability, then you should conclude with me that therefore God exists.
Thank you, Professor Craig. Now, 5 minutes, Professor Tännsjö.
Okay. Yeah, just a trivial point, a misunderstanding that has surfaced in the discussion here. I mean, there is a sense in which everything is permitted on the morality I defend. But I don't think that this was the idea intended by Dostoevsky. Perhaps it was, but I've never understood him in that way. I mean, utilitarianism is the idea that you should always act so as to maximize the sum total of well-being in the universe. And this means, of course, that there are no more conventionally described kinds of actions that are always wrong or always right. You can't even say that you should never torture a person if you adhere to the utilitarian creed, because in some very special situation, it might be the right thing to do because it produces better effects in the long run. So in that sense, I'm advocating a kind of morality, implying that everything is permitted. But this is not moral nihilism, because it's a very heavy demand you have on yourself in each instance that you should act, you should do that act that is maximizing in the way I have indicated. So all actions are either right or wrong. You can divide the moral universe in actions that are right or wrong. And some of those who are right are also obligatory. They are your duty to perform them, because they have many alternatives can be equally good, but those that are uniquely better than every other alternative in the situation, those are the actions that are your moral duty. So that's my idea of moral duty. And then Professor Craig comes back to the question over and over again, and perhaps we come to a situation where it doesn't really is any point in repeating our arguments, but he questions me, is there any foundation for this kind of obligation? And can we really believe that people will take such obligations seriously? And is there any reason for acting on them? And I repeat, well, yes, there are good, solid, moral reasons for abiding by them. It's the right thing to do. But then Professor Craig wants other kind of reason. But how can we have a better reason than a basic moral reason for action? I fail to understand that. And